folks. Welcome to this video of the SIMPLE framework, where SIMPLE stands for the Self-Improvement Model for Political Leadership Excellence. We are looking at the eighth influence factor today, which is polls. And the key question that we have for you is how to approach polls to increase your influence as a politician. Okay, without further ado, let's dive in. Now, I think politicians should approach polls with a very balanced and a strategic perspective. It's not an afterthought. Okay, I'll tell you more. And there are some key considerations for politicians when we are talking about polls. You know, your opinion polls, your surveys, whatever you call it. We're calling it polls here. Let's look at these considerations in relation to polls, which will definitely clarify your understanding as a politician how best to approach opinion surveys and polls from a strategic perspective for your campaign, for your service, for the work that you're doing for your constituents. Firstly, the contextual understanding is extremely important, where politicians should approach the polls by understanding the context in which they're conducted. Okay, now this can include, say, factors such as the sample size, methodologies, and the potential margin of error, for example. It's also important to recognize that polls are snapshots of public opinion at a particular moment and not always accurately reflect the broader sentiment or, say, your future outcome. So it's extremely important to understand that it just gives you that snapshot, right? It's just like a pulse check. It might not be giving you, it's not a crystal ball to completely tell you how the future will look like. The next thing to consider is using the polls as a tool for insights, because polls can provide you valuable insights into public opinion, attitudes, and preferences. Politicians can use polls to understand the concerns, the priorities, and aspirations of their constituents. Now, by analyzing and interpreting poll results, politicians can gain a better understanding of the issues that matter to the public and adjust their policies and messaging accordingly. So it's a tool for insights. Okay, so at regular interval, you might be setting up mechanism to collect this insight with the help of various tools, various mechanism framework. The third factor to consider is the identifying the trends and patterns. Now, rather than focusing solely on individual poll results, politicians should look for trends and patterns over time. Because by analyzing the multiple polls and tracking changes in public opinion, politicians can identify emerging trends, shifts in voter sentiment, and potential areas of your opportunity, your concern. And this can inform strategic decision making and campaign planning. So just if you look at the considerations so far, you understand the context, you are using the polls as a tool for your insights. Then from those insights, you're trying to identify the trends and patterns, and then you make necessary adjustments to your political tactics, your political campaigns on the ground, right? So you see this sequence emerging. While you're doing it, let's look at the other aspect of polls is you have to consider multiple data sources, because polls should not be the sole basis for decision making, right? That's a huge statement there. If you're not actually relying on any opinion polls at all, that's a problem. But you also should not be relying on polls as a silver bullet or, as I said before, a crystal ball. It cannot be the sole basis for your decision making. You have to consider multiple data sources, such as your qualitative research, your expert opinions, and constituency feedback, so that you can develop a comprehensive understanding of public sentiment. This helps to avoid over reliance on any single poll and ensures a more well rounded perspective. Okay. After the data sources topic, we have the engaging in the contextual analysis. Okay, not to confuse it with the understanding the context bit. Now you're actually analyzing the context because it's important for politicians to critically analyze poll results in the context of their specific constituency and political landscape. Because factors such as your demographics, regional variations, and historical voting patterns, all of this can influence the interpretation and significance of poll results. And this contextual analysis helps politicians make very informed decisions that are tailored to their specific constituency's needs and interests. Okay, so you're engaging in that contextual analysis of the results that you'll get from the polls. Next thing to consider is actually responding to polls. What's the point of having opinion surveys of your constituents and arranging polls if you are not acting on them? So you understand the context, you rely on multiple sources of data, you collect their opinion, then you engage in a contextual analysis, and then you have to respond. So politicians should use poll results as a source of feedback and adjust their strategies, messaging, and priorities accordingly. Now, however, it is important to balance the responsiveness to public opinion with principled leadership, okay, and the long-term vision, I'd say. Now, politicians should consider the broader impact of their decisions rather than making knee-jerk reactions solely based on poll results. That's extremely important. So you don't have in other words, you don't need to react to poll results. You should have a response ready. However, that doesn't need to kind of diminish your leadership principles or your long-term vision. So it doesn't mean that you will be changing your tactic every day depending on what the poll says. You should be very strong in your fundamentals as a politician. However, it's always a good idea to run these polls to check the public sentiment and take necessary adjustments as appropriate. But it doesn't mean you're changing every now and then or every time a poll results come in. And finally, the factor that you need to consider when we're talking about polls and how you can use polls to increase your influence as a politician, the last factor is engaging in dialogue. Because polls can be a starting point only for engaging in dialogue with constituents. You, as a politician, can use the poll results as a basis for discussions. You can have your town hall meetings or public consultations. And, this helps to deepen the understanding and it helps to clarify positions and build trust generally with the public. So ultimately, you as a politician should approach polls as one of many tools to inform decision making, gain insights into public opinion, and engage with constituents. Now, balancing poll results with broader considerations and staying true to their principles and long-term vision is essential for effective leadership. Okay. Now, I remember a few episodes of I think two politicians I had the good fortune to have worked with. It's been a while actually, some 4 or 5 years ago. Not in the UK, outside of the UK, but the fact was that the polls were conducted more at the political party level. So obviously there were these third party agencies, the companies who actually conduct these polls, but it's done at a party level or at a national level independently. But what I'm talking about here is you as an individual political leader can also think about having polls for yourself at an individual level. I'm not talking about if you have any party affiliation and the kind of the general public sentiment that is measured usually as a run up to an election, for example. I'm just talking about your individual poll, which is to measure the effectiveness of your political leadership as an individual, as a leader. So that's my that's my scope of discussion. I'm not talking about having polls for your party as a whole. Okay. Also worth mentioning now is that the polls, the opinion polls, they, as I said, enable people to express their views on important issues, and this can inform you about the views of groups of people. And I think generally it's good to know that most polls are carried out, at least in the UK. I think there are 6, 7 main organizations. You've got Populous, Survation like Lord Ashcroft, YouGov, Ipsos Mori, Opinium, ICM. They generally take a sample size of, say, 1,000, 2,000 people from 50 to 100 constituencies, and then they do what they do. And as you can imagine, these opinion polls are carried out on a variety of issues, and they may test policies for popularity, or they could test the approval rate for a political leader. So that's the one that I was talking about. That it's as an individual political leader, how can you use the polls here? But the central use of opinion polls is in the run-up to elections, and in particular, especially in the UK for the Westminster's general election, you see a lot of these opinion polls being used. And especially when it comes to elections, polls cannot tell you what someone will do on the election day. So this is an interesting topic worth mentioning when we're talking about polls, is that they can only record what the person says they intend to do, and people don't always tell the truth, even if the poll is taken, say, just after they have voted, in other words, the exit polls. And also, opinion polls do not just stand alone apart from elections. Some argue that they can actually influence the voting behavior as well. How is that? So think about it. So, say, polls showing a party leading before an election can have an influence on how people actually vote. The bandwagon effect in action. When people vote for the party they believe is going to win. If a party is trailing in the polls, either people will switch to it, or supporters of the leading party won't bother to vote because they think their party has already won. So that's the opposite, right? It's the boomerang effect there as well. And it's also important to note that exit polls, if they are publicized on the day of an election, that can also influence the voting behavior, because these polls are taken as voters leave the polling booth and ask how they voted. And if their results are announced early, it could mean a voter planning to vote late won't go to vote if they think their vote won't make a difference. Now, this is not an important in the UK, where we are all in the same time zone, for example, but it's extremely important in the USA, for example, where exit polls from the East Coast come out 5 hours before some polls on the West Coast close. So just a bit of a discussion around the polls and their usage, usually before or on the day of general elections, where this is extremely important, crucial, and that can influence the public opinion this way or other. So there you go. This is all I had to share with you, especially today when we are talking about polls and how the polls can help you as a politician to increase your influence. And before we leave, the key takeaway for this video that I want you to remember is, when it comes to elections, these elections are not the survival of the fittest or the carnival of the dumbest. It's the selection of the smarter by the smartest, the electorate. So if you as a politician is considering to run for an upcoming election, you need to bear in mind that it's a selection game where the smarter candidate among others, all parties, the smarter candidate will be elected by who? by the constituents, by the party members, by the general public. They are going to choose the smarter candidate on the day of election. Bear in mind, they are the smartest. That's what I want you to remember, that you can have your polls, you can see where it's heading, the opinions, etc. And if there is an election coming, and if you're planning for that election overall, it's just that a selection game by the smartest people out there, who are your constituents, the general public, the people of the country, the nation. They're just gonna choose a smarter candidate. But do not ever think that the electorate is dumb. It's actually they are the smartest, and they're just gonna choose the smarter of the candidate. And it could be you. Okay, brilliant. So on that note, let's sign off here, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye bye.